Marcus Aurelius was born into a civilization that appeared complete. Roads connected distant provinces with practiced certainty. Laws organized life with precision. Rituals reinforced the sense that order was permanent and self-sustaining. From a distance, Rome looked finished, as though the hardest work had already been done. Living inside it told a quieter story. An empire of that scale survives through continuous attention. Stability is not a natural state. It is an achievement that must be renewed daily. Administrators write. Judges decide. Soldiers hold borders. Merchants move goods. Any lapse carries consequences that travel far beyond the initial error. This reality shaped the psychological atmosphere of Roman life. Beneath ceremony and confidence lived an awareness that everything depended on people continuing to behave as expected. For those raised within this system, responsibility was not exceptional. It was ambient. Expectations surrounded daily life, communicated through tone rather than instruction. One learned early that composure mattered, that excess emotion complicated judgment, that impulsive behavior disrupted systems larger than oneself. This environment rewarded restraint. It valued reliability over originality. The ideal citizen, and especially the ideal leader, appeared steady rather than expressive. Public life encouraged a controlled presentation of self, where reactions were measured and words chosen carefully. Emotion was not denied, but it was expected to be governed. Such conditions shaped the inner life slowly. When order depends on participation, individuals internalize the need for regulation. Attention turns inward. One learns to notice thoughts before they become actions. This habit does not arise from philosophy at first. It arises from necessity. The Roman elite understood this implicitly. Education emphasized discipline alongside knowledge. Rhetoric trained speech. Law trained judgment. Philosophy trained character. These were not ornamental pursuits. They were practical tools for functioning within a complex social machine. Marcus grew up absorbing this atmosphere. Long before he encountered Stoic texts, he encountered the pressure they were designed to address. The challenge was not how to feel deeply, but how to feel without destabilizing action, how to remain attentive without becoming reactive, how to carry responsibility without being consumed by it. Empire also magnified consequence. Decisions rarely remained personal. A ruling affected families. A command affected regions. This scale introduced a particular strain, awareness that even careful choices could produce harm. Moral simplicity faded. Judgment became a balancing act rather than a declaration. This context matters because it reframes Stoicism entirely. It was not an escape from life's demands. It was a response to them. The philosophy spoke directly to people living within systems that required emotional regulation, ethical consistency, and endurance over long stretches of time. The Roman world did not encourage introspection for its own sake. It demanded functionality. Philosophy earned its place by supporting that demand. Stoicism, in particular, offered a way to maintain internal order when external order depended on it. Understanding Rome as a psychological environment clarifies why Marcus's later reflections take the shape they do. They are spare. They are corrective. They return again and again to basic distinctions. They were written by someone living inside a structure that rewarded steadiness and punished excess. Before examining Marcus himself, it helps to remain with this atmosphere. A world where order is visible but fragile, where responsibility is shared but unevenly distributed. where inner life must be managed carefully because its outward expression carries weight. Many modern lives echo this pattern quietly. Large organizations, social systems, professional roles, expectations that precede choice. The details differ. The pressure feels familiar. Marcus Aurelius emerged from this environment shaped by its demands. His philosophy cannot be separated from the world that required it. Marcus did not grow up deciding who he would become. That decision was made around him, quietly, through expectation rather than decree. From an early age, his life unfolded under observation. Relatives, tutors, and officials noticed his temperament, his seriousness, his capacity for restraint. These traits were encouraged, reinforced, and treated as signs of suitability for responsibility. Childhood, in this setting, did not center on exploration. It centered on preparation. Freedom arrived later, if at all. What came first was formation. Habits were shaped deliberately. Conduct mattered. Emotional excess was discouraged, not through punishment, but through example. Adults modeled restraint, and restraint became the standard. Growing up this way changes how a person experiences the world. When expectations arrive before preference, attention turns inward early. One becomes sensitive to how actions are perceived. Approval becomes conditional on reliability. Expression is filtered through consequence. Over time, this produces a heightened awareness of self-regulation. Marcus was educated with care and intensity. Tutors emphasized character alongside knowledge. Discipline was treated as a virtue in itself. The goal was not brilliance, but steadiness. Not speed, but consistency. These values aligned naturally with Stoic thinking, which would later give philosophical structure to habits already formed. This kind of upbringing carries psychological costs as well as strengths. Early seriousness can limit spontaneity. Constant evaluation can foster self-surveillance. When a child learns to manage impression before impulse, the inner life becomes layered. Reflection precedes action. Hesitation replaces immediacy. Yet it also builds capacity. Endurance grows. Attention sharpens. The ability to tolerate discomfort strengthens. Marcus learned to sit with difficulty without dramatizing it. This skill would later prove essential. There is a quiet tension in such a childhood. Identity forms around function rather than desire. One learns what is expected long before asking what is wanted. This can produce stability, but it can also create distance from instinct. Philosophy later becomes a way to reconcile this distance, offering language for understanding one's inner movements rather than suppressing them. Modern parallels are easy to find. Children raised in high expectation environments often mature quickly. They become reliable, composed, and capable. At the same time, they may struggle to identify their own preferences. Responsibility arrives early. Self-definition arrives later. Marcus's later reflections show awareness of this tension. He reminds himself to remain gentle, patient, and humane. These reminders suggest effort. Compassion does not always arrive automatically when discipline has been emphasized. It must be cultivated intentionally. Understanding this early context deepens appreciation for Marcus's philosophy. His focus on self-governance did not arise from detachment. It arose from a life shaped by expectation. Stoicism offered a way to inhabit responsibility without losing inner balance. Childhood without choice prepares a person for endurance. It also creates the need for reflection. Marcus carried both into adulthood, where philosophy would give structure to habits already deeply ingrained. Education, for Marcus, was never treated as a neutral accumulation of knowledge. It functioned as formation. Lessons were designed to shape judgment, posture, and temperament as much as intellect. What mattered was not how much one knew, but how reliably one could apply what was known under pressure. Rhetoric trained more than speech. It trained restraint. To speak well required control over impulse, attention to timing, sensitivity to audience. Law cultivated similar habits. Cases demanded patience, proportion, and the ability to hold multiple perspectives without rushing to conclusion. These disciplines quietly reinforced the same lesson. Inner order precedes effective action. Philosophy entered this educational environment not as speculation, but as reinforcement. Stoic ideas gave language to qualities already being cultivated: endurance, composure, attentiveness. They explained why these qualities mattered and how they could be strengthened deliberately rather than relied upon instinctively. Marcus's teachers emphasized exemplars over arguments. Character was learned through observation as much as instruction. Students were encouraged to notice how respected figures carried themselves, how they responded to insult, how they handled fatigue and frustration. Virtue appeared not as abstraction, but as lived behavior. This approach contrasts with modern assumptions about education. Knowledge today often stands apart from character. Intelligence is measured independently of conduct. For Marcus, the separation made little sense. A sharp mind without discipline introduced risk. Insight without restraint produced instability. The Stoic tradition fits seamlessly into this view. It treated philosophy as practical training for life's demands. Concepts were valuable only insofar as they shaped response. Reflection served action. Theory remained subordinate to practice. Marcus absorbed this orientation gradually. Philosophy did not arrive as revelation. It clarified habits already present. Stoicism explained why composure mattered. It articulated how judgment influenced emotion. It offered techniques for maintaining balance when habits alone proved insufficient. The emphasis on moral training also shaped Marcus's relationship with authority. He learned to respect hierarchy without becoming dependent on it. Respect flowed from function rather than personality. This distinction later allowed him to evaluate counsel without surrendering judgment. Education also introduced Marcus to the limits of certainty. Legal cases rarely presented clean answers. Rhetorical debates revealed how easily arguments could persuade without truth. Philosophy provided tools for navigating ambiguity without paralysis. This mattered deeply. A life of responsibility involves constant decision-making under uncertainty. Training that acknowledged this reality prepared Marcus for the complexity he would later face. He learned to act without perfect information, guided by principle rather than confidence. Moral training also addressed the temptation of pride. Education confers status. Skill invites admiration. Stoic instruction counterbalanced this by emphasizing humility. Knowledge did not elevate one above others. It increased obligation. The more one understood, the more carefully one was expected to act. This ethic resonated with Marcus. His later writings reflect suspicion toward vanity and self-importance. These were not abstract critiques. They were reminders shaped by early lessons. Philosophy reinforced restraint where education might otherwise have inflated ego. The integration of education and moral training laid the groundwork for Marcus's lifelong practice. Learning was never complete. Formation never ended. Each stage of life demanded renewed attention. Philosophy remained relevant because human weakness persisted. Understanding this educational foundation clarifies why Marcus approached Stoicism as ongoing discipline rather than achievement. Insight did not mark completion. It marked responsibility to continue practicing. This approach shaped the tone of his reflections: patient, corrective, repetitive. They echo a system of education designed to sustain character over time, not impress others in the moment. When Marcus was adopted by Antoninus Pius, he did not enter a court defined by spectacle or volatility. He entered a household shaped by consistency. Antoninus governed without theatrical ambition. His reign left few dramatic stories because it produced few dramatic disruptions. Administration for him was a daily responsibility, carried patiently rather than a stage on which to perform authority. This mattered more than any formal lesson. Marcus observed power exercised without urgency. Decisions unfolded slowly. Processes were respected. Anger was rare. Public confidence came not from force, but from predictability. Stability emerged through repetition rather than assertion. Living close to this model taught Marcus something subtle. Leadership did not require constant expression. It required presence. Reliability built trust more effectively than intensity. A ruler did not need to appear extraordinary to govern well. He needed to be dependable. This environment also revealed the emotional cost of responsibility. Antoninus's calm was not indifference. It was sustained effort. Maintaining order demanded attention to detail, patience with inefficiency, and tolerance for imperfection. These qualities do not draw admiration easily. They wear on the mind quietly. Marcus learned that boredom accompanies responsibility. Much of governance involved repetition, review, and maintenance. There were few moments of triumph. Many moments required endurance. Philosophy in this context supported patience rather than inspiration. Antoninus also modeled restraint in judgment. He listened carefully. He delayed decisions when necessary. He avoided cruelty. This approach reinforced the idea that authority functioned best when guided by proportion. Excess reaction destabilized systems. Measured response preserved them. For Marcus, this became an ethical orientation rather than a tactic. Power existed to serve continuity. The task was to sustain what worked and repair what failed without ego. This required humility. Personal preference yielded to institutional need. The emotional tone of Antoninus's rule left a lasting impression. Calm did not signal weakness. It signaled control. Anger was not proof of conviction. It was often evidence of inner disturbance. Marcus carried this understanding into his own leadership. This model also influenced Marcus's writing style later. The absence of flourish, the steady cadence, the lack of dramatization, all echo the governance he observed. Philosophy mirrored administration. Both sought order through restraint. Antoninus's influence offered Marcus reassurance. Authority did not require constant self-assertion. One could govern without spectacle. One could lead without dominating attention. This realization softened the psychological burden of power. It also deepened Marcus's respect for process. Systems functioned when individuals fulfilled their roles reliably. Personal brilliance mattered less than collective coherence. Philosophy reinforced this lesson by emphasizing alignment over expression. The example of Antoninus Pius provided Marcus with a living reference point. Stoic ideas no longer felt theoretical. They described behavior he had witnessed daily. Calm authority, patient attention, and ethical restraint appeared achievable, not idealized. This model prepared Marcus for the transition into power. He did not inherit an image of leadership defined by conquest or display. He inherited one defined by care, steadiness, and endurance. Philosophy would later help him maintain this posture under far greater strain. When Marcus assumed the role of emperor, the change was not gradual. Responsibility did not taper upward. It arrived whole. The structure he had observed for years now depended on his judgment. Decisions that once passed across his field of vision now stopped with him. There was no longer another authority to defer to. The final weight settled inward. Power alters time. Days compress. Problems arrive before they are fully formed. Choices must be made without the comfort of completion. Marcus entered a life where deliberation remained essential, yet delay carried its own cost. The mind had to remain clear while operating under constant demand. Privacy disappeared quickly. Every word became signal. Every silence invited interpretation. Personal moods could no longer be indulged openly. Fatigue did not excuse inattention. Illness did not suspend responsibility. The role absorbed the individual rather than accommodating him. This shift created a particular psychological strain. The self that once reflected quietly now had to act decisively. Doubt could not be displayed. Uncertainty could not linger too long. The inner life risked being crowded out by necessity. Marcus responded by tightening his internal discipline. Attention became deliberate. Reflection moved inward rather than outward. Philosophy no longer served preparation alone. It became maintenance, a way to preserve clarity while the external world accelerated. Authority also isolated. Few people spoke freely. Praise arrived filtered through self-interest. Criticism often carried hidden motive. Genuine counsel became rare. The mind learned to stand alone with its judgments. This isolation heightened the need for internal honesty. Without reliable external correction, self-examination mattered more. Writing became a space where clarity could return without performance. Philosophy offered criteria when feedback grew unreliable. The scale of consequence also reshaped emotion. Decisions carried outcomes beyond personal experience. Harm could not always be avoided. Regret threatened to accumulate. Marcus needed a way to hold responsibility without allowing it to erode stability. Stoic practice addressed this directly. It distinguished intention from outcome, effort from result, judgment from event. This separation did not remove accountability. It prevented collapse. Action could continue without being paralyzed by imagined alternatives. Becoming emperor forced Marcus to live continuously within limits. Limits of knowledge, limits of control, limits of endurance. Philosophy offered a framework for acknowledging these limits without resentment. This period marked the transition from preparation to sustained trial. Everything learned earlier faced real pressure. Habits hardened or failed. Reflection proved its value only if it functioned amid exhaustion. Marcus did not meet this moment with confidence. He met it with attention. That attention became the ground on which his philosophy would continue to operate. Marcus's reign unfolded under conditions that resisted planning. Military pressure along the empire's borders demanded attention that never fully resolved. Campaigns extended over years. Information arrived late or incomplete. Decisions were made in the absence of certainty, with lives depending on timing as much as intent. War introduced a particular kind of mental strain. Command required decisiveness, yet reality remained fluid. Weather altered strategy. Morale shifted unexpectedly. Supplies failed. Even well-considered plans unraveled without warning. Marcus learned to act while knowing that outcomes would never fully align with intention. This experience sharpened his understanding of uncertainty. The mind prefers closure. It seeks assurance that effort will be rewarded with success. War dissolves this expectation. Action becomes necessary even when clarity remains unavailable. Philosophy helped Marcus remain functional within this gap. The Antonine Plague deepened this lesson. Disease moved through cities and camps without discrimination. Rank offered little protection. Systems designed for order struggled to contain it. Loss became common. Grief accumulated quietly. Marcus witnessed suffering on a scale that resisted explanation. In such conditions, emotional containment mattered. Public despair threatened morale. Private despair threatened judgment. Stoic discipline did not remove sorrow. It prevented sorrow from overwhelming responsibility. Marcus learned to acknowledge loss while continuing to act. Living amid death also altered time perception. The future became less predictable. Plans extended only as far as conditions allowed. Attention returned repeatedly to the present task. Philosophy supported this narrowing of focus. It encouraged action without reliance on imagined stability. Uncertainty also exposed the limits of control. Outcomes depended on countless variables beyond command. Accepting this reduced internal conflict. Effort could be applied without demanding assurance. Responsibility remained, but self-blame softened. These experiences reinforced Marcus's emphasis on judgment. External events unfolded independently. What remained within reach was response. How one interpreted difficulty shaped endurance. Philosophy trained this interpretation deliberately. The combination of war and plague tested Stoicism in practice. Ideas proved useful only if they functioned under strain. Marcus's continued reliance on philosophical reflection suggests that it did. Not as comfort, but as orientation. Living through these crises deepened his humility. Power did not grant mastery over fate. Authority did not suspend vulnerability. This awareness informed his later reminders about impermanence and proportion. The uncertainty of this period also sharpened compassion. Suffering was no longer abstract. It was witnessed daily. Marcus's writings reflect this awareness in their emphasis on patience and understanding toward others' limitations. War and plague stripped life to essentials. They revealed what endured when structures faltered. Attention, judgment, and restraint remained usable. Philosophy supported these capacities when others failed. This period marked a turning point. The pressures Marcus faced were no longer hypothetical. They were constant. Stoicism shifted fully into a practice of survival and care under sustained uncertainty. As Marcus settled into rule, another pressure grew steadily alongside war and disease. Visibility. Power dissolved the boundary between the public role and the private person. Observation became constant. Actions were recorded. Words were repeated. Silence itself acquired meaning. Even restraint could be interpreted as strategy. This condition altered how the inner life functioned. Most people experience a division between who they are outwardly and who they are alone. For Marcus, that division narrowed sharply. Public presence followed him everywhere. Advisors, officials, soldiers, and petitioners surrounded his days. Even moments of rest remained permeable to responsibility. Under such conditions, self-expression becomes risky. A moment of irritation can be magnified. A passing doubt can be read as weakness. Emotional fluctuation carries political consequence. The safest posture becomes composure. Yet composure, when sustained externally, must be supported internally. Otherwise, it fractures. The mind requires a space where reaction can be examined without consequence. For Marcus, philosophy provided this space. Reflection moved inward because it could not safely move outward. The loss of privacy also complicated honesty. Praise arrived filtered through interest. Criticism arrived distorted by fear or ambition. Genuine feedback grew scarce. This scarcity heightened the importance of self-scrutiny. Without reliable external correction, internal standards mattered more. Marcus's writings reveal awareness of this danger. He reminded himself not to trust admiration. He questioned whether actions aligned with principle rather than approval. These reminders served as anchors when external signals became unreliable. Constant visibility also amplified fatigue. Performing steadiness requires effort. Maintaining measured tone across endless interactions drains energy quietly. Without replenishment, even discipline erodes. Philosophy functioned as replenishment rather than instruction. It restored alignment when strain accumulated. This experience resonates beyond empire. Many modern roles involve continuous observation. Leadership positions, public-facing professions, even social environments shaped by digital presence create similar pressure. The feeling of being watched alters behavior. It narrows spontaneity. It increases self-monitoring. Marcus's response was not withdrawal. He did not seek invisibility. He cultivated internal autonomy. If the outer life could not offer refuge, the inner life had to become one. This autonomy depended on clarity about judgment. Others' interpretations lay beyond control. Only intention and response remained governable. By returning repeatedly to this distinction, Marcus protected his inner stability from external noise. The loss of a private self also sharpened Marcus's understanding of humility. Identity could not rest on perception. Reputation shifted unpredictably. Anchoring self-worth internally reduced vulnerability to these shifts. Over time, this posture stabilized his engagement with the world. Visibility no longer dictated reaction. Observation no longer demanded performance. Action could proceed without attachment to interpretation. This discipline prepared Marcus for the deeper work of philosophy. With external life saturated by scrutiny, internal life required structure. That structure would soon take the form of deliberate practice, writing, reflection, and repeated return to first principles. The writings that would later be gathered under the name Meditations did not begin as a project. They emerged gradually, without announcement, and without any intention of being read by others. Marcus did not sit down to create a work. He returned repeatedly, to the act of writing itself. This distinction is essential. A book seeks coherence. It anticipates readers. It arranges ideas so they can be followed, remembered, and cited. Marcus's notes do none of this. They interrupt themselves. They circle familiar ground. They repeat ideas in slightly altered language. Their form reflects use rather than design. Writing served Marcus as a practice of orientation. It allowed him to steady the mind when circumstances unsettled it. The page absorbed excess thought. Words slowed inner momentum. Reflection became deliberate rather than reactive. This process did not aim at discovery. It aimed at recall. Marcus already knew the principles he wrote down. He had studied them for years. The problem was not ignorance. It was drift. Under fatigue, pressure, or irritation, understanding slipped out of reach. Writing brought it back within view. This reveals something honest about human psychology. Insight does not remain available simply because it has been achieved once. The mind forgets. Attention wanders. Emotion distorts judgment. Marcus accepted this without frustration. He treated forgetfulness as a condition rather than a flaw. Each entry in Meditations functions like a hand placed gently on the shoulder, a reminder rather than a revelation. The tone is firm but patient. Marcus does not argue with himself. He does not dramatize difficulty. He returns to basic distinctions and lets them do their work. The practice also created distance. Writing allowed Marcus to step back from immediacy. An impression could be examined instead of obeyed. A reaction could be delayed long enough to be questioned. The act itself created a pause, and within that pause, choice became possible. This pause mattered deeply in a life structured by urgency. Decisions pressed constantly. Responsibilities overlapped. Writing carved out a space where nothing had to be decided immediately. The mind could settle before returning to action. There is no sense in these pages of performance. Marcus did not seek elegance. He did not refine phrasing for effect. Many entries are abrupt, even rough. This roughness reflects sincerity. The writing existed to function, not to impress. The privacy of the practice reinforced this sincerity. Without an audience, there was no incentive to appear resolved. Doubt could be acknowledged. Frustration could be named. Correction could occur without embarrassment. This freedom strengthened honesty. Writing also created continuity across time. When circumstances changed, the voice on the page remained familiar. It reminded Marcus who he intended to be, even when events pulled him elsewhere. The practice linked different moments of his life into a single thread of attention. This is why the text resists linear reading. It was not meant to be consumed. It was meant to be returned to. Each entry stands alone because each was written to meet a specific mental state. Together, they form a record of maintenance rather than progress. Understanding Meditations in this way prevents misunderstanding its purpose. It is not a manual for others. It is evidence of effort. A life using philosophy to remain intact under pressure. This practice prepared Marcus for the deeper structure of Stoic thought. Writing kept principles close enough to be applied. It created the conditions under which judgment could be examined carefully. From this foundation, the core Stoic distinction between what lies within our authority and what does not could be lived rather than merely understood. Marcus chose to write these private reflections in Greek rather than Latin. This choice was not accidental, and it was not merely academic. Greek was the language of philosophy, but more importantly, it was not the language of command. Latin governed law, administration, and public authority. Greek belonged to thought, inquiry, and inward examination. Writing in Greek created psychological distance. It separated the inner voice from the outer role. When Marcus wrote in Latin, he spoke as emperor, judge, and authority. When he wrote in Greek, he stepped into a quieter register. The shift in language allowed him to think without invoking power. This distance mattered because power reshapes thought. When every word can become policy, thinking itself grows cautious. Writing in Greek freed Marcus from this constraint. It allowed him to speak plainly to himself, without anticipating consequence or interpretation. The language marked the space as private. Language shapes attention. Words carry associations. Latin carried the weight of duty, command, and formality. Greek carried the texture of reflection. By choosing Greek, Marcus signaled to himself that this was not a place for performance. It was a place for correction. This separation supported honesty. Self-examination requires safety. The mind must be able to admit weakness without fear of exposure. Greek provided that safety through distance. It softened the authority of the voice and made room for vulnerability. The choice also reflects Marcus's understanding of identity as layered rather than singular. He inhabited many roles. Emperor was one, philosopher was another. Writing in Greek allowed these roles to coexist without conflict. The private self could speak without undermining the public one. There is a subtle humility in this choice. Marcus did not assume that his public voice was suitable for self-guidance. He did not rely on authority to instruct himself. He returned to a learner's posture. Greek placed him back among students rather than rulers. This return mattered because authority can harden judgment. When one is accustomed to being obeyed, inner critique weakens. Writing in a language associated with inquiry countered this tendency. It reminded Marcus that understanding required openness rather than command. The practice also reinforced continuity with philosophical tradition. Greek connected Marcus to thinkers who had wrestled with the same human problems centuries earlier. This connection widened perspective. Personal difficulties appeared as part of a longer human story rather than isolated burdens. Distance from immediacy also softened emotion. Writing in a secondary language slowed thought. It reduced impulsive phrasing. Reflection became more deliberate. The extra effort required to form sentences created space for examination. This is not unlike how people today gain clarity by writing rather than speaking, or by choosing a medium that slows reaction. The act of translation, whether between languages or between feeling and words, creates distance that supports understanding. Marcus used language as a tool for self-regulation. Greek was not a barrier, it was a filter. It allowed the mind to step back from urgency and regain proportion. Through this practice, the inner life remained protected from the demands of power. Reflection retained independence. Judgment could be refined without interference from role or reputation. This linguistic choice reveals something essential about Marcus's approach to philosophy. He did not seek purity of thought through isolation. He sought clarity through separation where necessary. Inner order required boundaries. With this distance established, writing could serve its deeper function: repetition without fatigue, correction without shame, and return without frustration. This prepared Marcus for the repetitive structure that defines meditations, and for the acceptance of forgetting as a central human condition. One of the most striking features of meditations is how often Marcus returns to the same ideas. The themes recur with small variations: judgment, impermanence, duty, restraint, proportion. To a reader expecting progression, this can feel puzzling. To someone living with pressure, it feels accurate. Marcus understood something fundamental about the human mind. Understanding fades. Insight does not secure itself permanently. What feels obvious in calm moments becomes inaccessible under strain. Fatigue narrows attention. Emotion distorts proportion. Time erodes clarity. Repetition addresses this reality directly. It accepts forgetting as part of being human, rather than treating it as failure. Marcus did not shame himself for needing reminders. He built reminders into his practice. Each return reinforced orientation. This approach differs from how philosophy is often presented. Ideas are introduced, explained, and then left behind. Marcus treated ideas as tools that must remain within reach. If they drifted too far, they lost usefulness. Writing kept them close. Repetition also served a calming function. Familiar phrases grounded the mind. Returning to known principles steadied attention when novelty overwhelmed it. The mind rested more easily on what it recognized. This is why the writing avoids escalation. Marcus does not intensify arguments or seek new angles for their own sake. He returns to what works. The goal is not intellectual excitement, it is stability. Forgetting, in this view, becomes a signal rather than a flaw. When principles slip away, it indicates fatigue, distraction, or emotional overload. Writing responds by restoring alignment rather than assigning blame. This posture fosters patience. Change unfolds slowly. Habits resist immediate transformation. Marcus accepted this pace. His writing reflects endurance rather than urgency. Each entry contributes incrementally. Repetition also reinforces humility. Needing reminders undercuts pride. It reminds the thinker that understanding does not elevate one beyond weakness. It requires maintenance. This insight has wide relevance. Many struggles persist not because solutions are unknown, but because they are forgotten in the moment they are needed most. Marcus's practice addresses this gap gently. The rhythm of repetition also supports sleep and reflection. Ideas return softly. They do not demand attention. They offer it. The mind can drift and return without losing coherence. Marcus's acceptance of repetition prepared him for Stoicism's central distinction. When principles must be recalled repeatedly, clarity about what matters most becomes essential. Among all reminders, one stands above the rest. Understanding what lies within one's authority and what does not. That distinction anchors the entire practice. At the center of Stoic practice sits a distinction that appears simple until it is lived. Marcus returned to it more than any other idea because it clarified where effort mattered and where it was wasted. Without this clarity, responsibility expands endlessly. With it, responsibility becomes manageable. The distinction concerns authority. Some things unfold independently of preference. Others depend entirely on judgment. Confusing these two creates unnecessary strain. Separating them restores proportion. Events arrive without asking permission. Weather changes. Bodies age. Other people act according to their own understanding, limits, and impulses. Circumstances shift through chains of cause, far beyond any individual's reach. Marcus did not deny this reality. He treated it as the starting point. What remained within reach was response. How an event was interpreted, what meaning was assigned to it, what action followed. These belong to the inner domain. They could be shaped deliberately. This separation alters how difficulty is experienced. When an obstacle appears, the mind often reacts as if it has been personally wronged. Frustration rises. Resistance hardens. Marcus learned to pause at this moment. The obstacle itself carries no judgment. Judgment enters when the mind declares it unacceptable. By noticing this sequence, effort can be redirected. Energy moves away from protest and toward response. The situation remains. The struggle lessens. This practice does not encourage passivity. Marcus acted decisively when action was required. The distinction guided how outcomes were held internally. Success informed learning without inflating identity. Failure informed correction without collapsing it. Everyday life offered endless opportunities to practice this separation. A delayed message, a misunderstood remark, a plan interrupted. Each instance invited examination. Was the distress caused by the event or by the interpretation attached to it? Marcus recognized how often distress arose from expectations placed on external conditions. Expecting consistency from an unpredictable world guaranteed frustration. Adjusting expectation restored equilibrium. This approach also softened interpersonal conflict. Others' behavior fell outside direct control. Response remained internal. Attention shifted from changing people to refining reaction. This reduced resentment and preserved clarity. The distinction requires continual reinforcement. The mind habitually reaches outward, claiming authority where none exists. Stoic training draws it back gently. Again and again, attention returns to what can be governed. Living this way narrows focus without diminishing care. One attends fully to intention, effort, and judgment. The rest is treated as context rather than threat. Over time, this boundary creates stability. Inner life becomes less reactive. External change loses its power to dictate internal state. The mind remains engaged without being overextended. Marcus described this stability as a kind of inner refuge, not a place of withdrawal, but a position of balance. From there, action remains possible without turmoil. This distinction sets the stage for understanding how emotions form and how they can be regulated without suppression. Emotion reveals where judgment has overstepped its domain. Exploring this process illuminates how Marcus approached anger, irritation, and fear with steady attention rather than force. Marcus paid close attention to how emotion begins, because emotion reveals the point where the mind quietly gives up its authority. Nothing dramatic is required. A single impression is enough. A look, a sound, a delay, a remark. Something registers, and almost immediately the mind explains it. This explanation feels automatic, but it is not. Between impression and reaction lies a narrow space. Marcus learned to watch this space carefully. It is here that judgment forms. It is here that emotion takes shape. An impression by itself is simply contact. A sound reaches the ear, words are heard, an event occurs. At this stage, Nothing has yet been labeled as good or bad. Disturbance enters only when the mind assigns meaning. The assignment happens quickly, often unnoticed. Marcus trained himself to slow it down. By pausing at the moment of impression, he regained choice. He could ask whether the explanation forming in his mind was accurate, necessary, or exaggerated. This questioning did not require elaborate reasoning. It required attention. Emotion followed judgment reliably. When the mind declared something harmful, anger appeared. When it declared something threatening, fear arose. When it declared something desirable, longing followed. Understanding this sequence reduced mystery. Emotion no longer appeared as an invading force. It appeared as a response shaped by interpretation. Marcus did not attempt to prevent impressions. That would be impossible. He worked instead on the layer that followed them. Judgment could be examined. Meaning could be adjusted. Reaction could be delayed. This practice demanded patience. Impressions arrive constantly. Each one invites immediate response. Training the mind to pause requires repetition. Marcus accepted this repetition as part of the work. Progress appeared gradually through consistency rather than breakthrough. Slowing judgment also softened emotional intensity. When meaning was held lightly, emotion lost its grip. Feelings still arose, but they did not overwhelm action. They informed rather than commanded. This approach proved especially useful in moments of irritation. Small disturbances accumulate quickly. Each one adds a layer of tension. By examining impressions individually, Marcus prevented accumulation. Each event stood alone rather than forming a chain. The same practice applied to praise and pleasure. Pleasant impressions invite attachment. The mind exaggerates their importance. By observing judgment here as well, Marcus avoided dependency. Enjoyment remained, but clinging diminished. The moment of choice exists in every interaction. It is brief, but it determines tone. Training attention to find it transforms experience quietly. Life becomes less reactive without becoming dull. Marcus treated this capacity as a form of freedom. External events could not be chosen. Internal response could. This freedom required vigilance rather than force. Understanding this process prepares the ground for one of Marcus's most enduring images, the inner citadel. A place not of isolation, but of stability built through attention. Marcus often returned to the image of an inner refuge. He did not imagine it as a place of escape, but as a position of stability that could not be breached by circumstance alone. This inner citadel was not built from denial or withdrawal. It was built from clarity. The idea emerged naturally from his attention to judgment. If impressions could be examined before they hardened into reaction, then the mind could remain intact even when conditions shifted. The citadel was not hidden from the world. It stood within it, exposed to events, yet not ruled by them. This image matters because it reframes strength. Strength does not require hardness. It requires coherence. A mind that understands what belongs to it does not need to defend itself constantly. It remains open without becoming vulnerable to every disturbance. Marcus did not treat this inner refuge as something one enters permanently. It was not a retreat. It was a reference point. One moved outward into action and returned inward for recalibration. Life unfolded through this rhythm. The citadel formed through practice rather than intention. Each time judgment was examined, a stone was laid. Each time reaction was delayed, structure strengthened. Over time, the mind learned where to stand. This stability supported engagement. Marcus continued to lead, judge, and decide. The inner refuge did not remove him from responsibility. It allowed him to carry it without collapse. Action flowed from clarity rather than agitation. The image also addressed fear. When the mind believes its safety depends entirely on external conditions, fear multiplies. When safety is relocated inward, fear loses intensity. Events still matter. They simply lose the power to destabilize identity. This does not eliminate pain. Loss still hurts. Failure still disappoints. The citadel does not block sensation. It prevents sensation from becoming total. Pain occupies its proper place, rather than flooding the entire mind. Marcus also understood that the citadel must remain flexible. Rigidity invites fracture. Openness preserves resilience. The refuge was not built to resist reality, but to meet it without distortion. Daily life offered countless opportunities to test this stability. Interruptions, conflicts, delays. Each event pressed against the inner structure. When judgment held, the structure remained sound. When judgment slipped, the need for repair became visible. Repair did not involve self-criticism. It involved return. The mind noticed its drift and came back. This return mattered more than perfection. Marcus valued recovery over flawlessness. Living with an inner refuge changed the texture of experience. External chaos no longer demanded internal chaos. Attention could remain steady amid movement. Calm became available without detachment. This posture also affected relationships. Others' emotions no longer dictated one's own. Boundaries became clearer. Compassion remained possible because stability prevented overwhelm. The inner citadel stands as a metaphor for mature freedom. Not freedom from obligation, but freedom within it. Not freedom from feeling, but freedom to choose response. With this stability established, Marcus turned his attention to specific emotional patterns that most often challenged it. Among these, anger and irritation appeared repeatedly. Examining them closely revealed how easily judgment could overstep its domain, and how discipline could restore balance. Anger drew Marcus's attention again and again because it revealed how quickly judgment could abandon proportion. It often appeared justified. It arrived carrying reasons, explanations, and a sense of moral clarity. This made it difficult to question. Yet Marcus learned that anger rarely improved judgment. It narrowed it. He noticed how anger followed a predictable pattern. Something occurred that conflicted with expectation. The mind interpreted this conflict as offense or harm. Energy surged toward response. Words pressed forward. Action felt urgent. The speed of this sequence created the illusion of necessity. Marcus trained himself to slow this movement. He examined the expectation behind the reaction. Was it reasonable? Was it realistic? Was it necessary? Often, anger rested on assumptions that did not withstand attention. Expecting others to behave with constant insight guaranteed frustration. Expecting events to unfold smoothly ignored reality. When these expectations were loosened, anger lost its footing. This did not mean accepting harm passively. Marcus distinguished between response and agitation. Action taken calmly tended to be more effective. Boundaries enforced without anger carried clarity rather than hostility. Judgment remained intact. He also noticed how fatigue intensified anger. When the body weakened, patience eroded. Small disturbances gained force. Recognizing this pattern allowed for adjustment. Rest, when possible, became part of discipline. Compassion toward one's own limits reduced reactivity. Anger toward oneself followed similar mechanics. Errors triggered harsh judgment. Marcus learned to treat mistakes as information rather than verdicts. Correction replaced condemnation. This preserved energy for improvement. The discipline required repetition. Anger did not disappear. It became less convincing. Each instance provided another opportunity to practice restraint. Over time, this practice reshaped emotional life. Calm became more accessible. Irritation lost momentum. Judgment regained authority. Anger revealed where the mind attempted to control what lay beyond its reach. Examining it clarified the boundary of responsibility once again. This understanding prepared Marcus to address quieter emotional patterns, irritation and resentment, that accumulate through daily life and quietly drain attention. Irritation interested Marcus because it worked quietly. Unlike anger, it rarely announced itself. It accumulated. Small delays, repeated mistakes, minor inefficiencies. Each one left a trace. Over the course of a day, these traces layered themselves into fatigue that felt disproportionate to any single event. Marcus noticed how easily attention leaked through these openings. The mind replayed minor offenses. It rehearsed complaints internally. Energy drained without producing clarity or action. Irritation consumed resources while pretending to be insignificant. This pattern mattered because most of life unfolds at this scale. Catastrophes are rare. Daily friction is constant. If the mind responds to every small disturbance as if it deserves protest, steadiness erodes gradually. Stoic discipline addressed this by restoring proportion. Marcus reminded himself that many irritations arose from expectation rather than necessity. Expecting efficiency from complex systems invited frustration. Expecting consistency from imperfect people did the same. By adjusting expectation, irritation softened. Events remained. Their emotional charge diminished. Attention returned to what could be done, rather than what should not have happened. Resentment followed a similar path, but it lingered longer. It formed when irritation was revisited repeatedly. The mind stored grievances and returned to them in idle moments. Marcus treated this habit with suspicion. Resentment offered no solution. It prolonged discomfort. He countered resentment by returning to present action. What could be addressed now? What required acceptance? By answering these questions, the mind released its grip on the past. This approach conserved energy. Emotional discipline functioned as resource management. Energy preserved through restraint became available for meaningful effort. Marcus also recognized how irritation distorted perception. When the mind was primed to notice faults, it found them everywhere. This narrowed experience. Letting go widened it again. The discipline did not eliminate reaction. It prevented accumulation. Each event stood alone. The day remained navigable. Living this way required attentiveness rather than force. Irritation dissolved when seen clearly. Resentment loosened when attention returned to the present. This quiet work supported calm more reliably than dramatic emotional control. It addressed the texture of daily life where philosophy proves its worth. Understanding this prepared Marcus to approach relationships with greater clarity and compassion, without illusion and without withdrawal. Marcus's approach to compassion was grounded rather than sentimental. He did not imagine people as naturally wise or consistently reasonable. He observed them as they were, shaped by habit, impulse, fear, and limited understanding. This observation did not harden him. It clarified how compassion could function without disappointment. He recognized that much harm arises from ignorance rather than malice. People act according to what seems right to them in the moment, filtered through their own conditioning and constraints. Seeing this reduced surprise. Reduced surprise softened judgment. Compassion, in this sense, meant understanding without excusing. It allowed Marcus to respond firmly when necessary, without hatred. Boundaries could be maintained without contempt. Correction could occur without humiliation. This posture required humility. Recognizing others' limitations implied acknowledging one's own. Marcus reminded himself that he, too, acted from partial understanding. This awareness equalized perspective. Moral superiority lost its appeal. The discipline also protected emotional balance. Expecting perfection from others guaranteed frustration. Accepting limitation preserved calm. This acceptance did not remove responsibility. It informed response. Marcus applied this understanding to leadership. Orders were given clearly. Consequences followed actions. Yet punishment was restrained. Mercy remained possible because judgment was not clouded by personal offense. In daily interaction, compassion expressed itself through patience. Listening replaced reaction. Clarification replaced accusation. Many conflicts dissolved when misunderstanding was addressed rather than assumed. This approach did not deny the existence of harm. It prevented the escalation of harm through retaliatory emotion. Calm response often diffused tension before it hardened. Compassion without illusion also guarded against naivety. Marcus did not ignore patterns of behavior. He recognized when trust was misplaced. Wisdom guided engagement. Kindness remained, but it did not blind judgment. Living this way preserved humanity within authority. Power did not require emotional distance. It required clarity. Compassion supported clarity by reducing distortion. This balance between understanding and firmness shaped Marcus's interactions. Relationships remained functional without becoming adversarial. Emotional energy remained available for responsibility rather than resentment. This posture of compassion prepared Marcus to reflect more deeply on meaning, duty, and the broader shape of a life lived within time. For Marcus, the question of meaning did not begin with passion or fulfillment. It began with placement. Each person, he believed, entered a world already structured by relationships, needs, and functions. Life did not ask first what one desired. It asked what was required. This perspective reshaped how duty was experienced. Duty was not a burden imposed from outside. It was the natural activity of a being participating in a larger order. Just as a limb moves in coordination with the body, a person acts within the web of roles they inhabit. Resistance created strain. Alignment created ease. Marcus applied this understanding directly to his own position. As emperor, his role involved administration, judgment, and protection. Personal inclination mattered less than necessity. Comfort yielded to responsibility. This did not produce bitterness. It produced clarity. Knowing what was required simplified decision-making. This idea extends far beyond power. Every life contains roles that cannot be avoided. Child, parent, partner, colleague, citizen. Each role carries obligations shaped by circumstance rather than choice. Marcus believed meaning emerged through meeting these obligations with care rather than longing for alternatives. This posture relieved comparison. Success was no longer measured against others, it was measured against function. One did not need to outshine, one needed to fulfill. Marcus observed how dissatisfaction often arose from resisting role. People imagined lives they were not living and resented the one before them. This imagination drained attention from the present. Stoic practice redirected focus back to action. Ambition changed under this lens. Achievement mattered less than integrity. Recognition lost urgency. Quiet reliability gained value. Work done well, even when unseen, carried its own satisfaction. This approach also softened fear of insignificance. A role need not be grand to matter. Contribution occurred through participation. Life gained coherence through continuity rather than climax. Living this way felt ordinary. Days repeated, tasks returned, effort continued. Meaning accumulated gradually rather than announcing itself. Marcus understood that this ordinariness unsettled many people. It lacked drama. It offered no promise of distinction. Yet it supported stability. It reduced internal conflict. It allowed energy to be spent constructively. Duty, in this sense, anchored life within time. It provided shape amid impermanence. Each moment asked only for appropriate response, rather than permanent achievement. This understanding prepared Marcus to face the reality that frames all roles eventually: their end. Impermanence would dissolve even the most carefully fulfilled life. Meeting this truth without despair required perspective. Marcus approached time without drama. He did not treat it as an enemy to be defeated or a mystery to be solved. He treated it as the medium in which all life unfolds. Everything that exists does so temporarily. Every role, every possession, every reputation passes through this medium and then dissolves back into it. This awareness did not lead him toward despair. It led him toward proportion. He observed how urgently people clung to what could not be held. Status, admiration, influence, physical strength, even memory itself. Each appeared solid when viewed up close, yet fragile when viewed across years. What seemed essential in one season faded quietly in the next. Entire lives compressed into a few lines of record, and eventually into nothing at all. Marcus returned to this observation often because it softened fear. When time is seen clearly, many anxieties lose their urgency. Embarrassment shrinks. Conflict fades. The imagined permanence of mistakes dissolves. Perspective expands. This did not make effort meaningless. It refined it. If nothing lasts, then the value of action lies not in endurance, but in quality. The question becomes how one acts while present, not how long the effects persist. Marcus applied this thinking to reputation. Praise travels briefly. Criticism does the same. Names remembered for generations eventually disappear. Understanding this reduced the pull of approval. It freed action from the need to be witnessed. He also applied it to suffering. Pain feels total in the moment it is experienced. Time reveals its limits. Even intense hardship moves, changes, and passes. Remembering this did not deny pain. It prevented panic. It allowed endurance without amplification. Death itself occupied a practical place in Marcus's thought. He did not contemplate it to provoke fear. He contemplated it to normalize it. Birth and death appeared as movements within the same process. Resistance added nothing. Acceptance restored calm. This familiarity reduced shock. When loss occurred, it arrived within a framework already considered. Grief still followed. It did not destabilize judgment completely. Sorrow moved through awareness rather than overwhelming it. Marcus also noticed how awareness of mortality sharpened attention. When time is limited, distraction loses appeal. Each moment gains weight without urgency. Attention deepens naturally. Life becomes more vivid, not less. This perspective encouraged simplicity. Excess desire complicated existence unnecessarily. Fewer attachments meant fewer disturbances. What remained mattered more. Living with time in this way did not remove sadness. It removed exaggeration. It returned experience to scale. Marcus's reflections on time were not meant to console. They were meant to orient. When placed within the flow of impermanence, life becomes manageable again. Each role can be fulfilled without the demand for permanence. This understanding prepared Marcus for honest reflection on the limits of his own philosophy. Acceptance and calm offered strength, but they were not complete answers to every human problem. Acknowledging this preserved integrity. Marcus did not present Stoicism as a solution to every human difficulty, and reading him carefully reveals an awareness of its limits. The very qualities that give Stoicism its strength, acceptance, restraint, inward focus, also carry risks when applied without care. One such risk lies in emotional narrowing. Stoic discipline trains composure, but composure can harden if it becomes habitual avoidance. Some forms of pain do not respond well to reinterpretation. Grief, trauma, and deep loss often require expression rather than correction. Marcus acknowledged sorrow, yet his tools were better suited to regulation than to release. This leaves space where Stoicism alone may feel insufficient. Another tension appears in the relationship between inner calm and external injustice. Stoicism emphasizes control over judgment rather than circumstance. This focus preserves stability, but it can also reduce urgency. Systems of harm persist not only because individuals react poorly, but because structures remain unchallenged. Marcus lived within hierarchies that Stoicism did not fundamentally question. Slavery, exclusion, and inequality remained part of the world he governed. This does not imply indifference. Marcus emphasized fairness, mercy, and restraint. He sought to govern humanely within the bounds of his understanding. Yet the philosophy he practiced did not provide a framework for systemic critique. It steadied the individual more readily than it transformed the collective. There is also a subtle risk of misapplication. Stoicism can be used to justify endurance where change is possible. Acceptance can slide into resignation. Calm can replace engagement. Marcus warned against this implicitly by emphasizing duty and action, but the boundary remains delicate. Power complicates this further. Marcus's position insulated him from certain consequences. His ability to accept hardship differed from that of those without resources or authority. Stoicism practiced from privilege does not translate evenly across experience. This unevenness matters when applying the philosophy broadly. Marcus's own humility helps here. He did not write to instruct others. He wrote to correct himself. His Stoicism remains personal, contextual, and provisional. It invites use rather than obedience. Understanding these limits preserves the philosophy's usefulness. Stoicism functions best as a stabilizing foundation. It supports resilience, clarity, and proportion. It does not replace empathy, collective responsibility, or the need for change. Marcus's value lies partly in this incompleteness. His philosophy does not claim finality. It remains open to supplementation. It steadies without closing inquiry. Recognizing where Stoicism breaks prevents it from becoming rigid. It remains a companion rather than a doctrine, a practice that can be combined with other forms of care, understanding, and action. With these limits acknowledged, what remains is the lived texture of the philosophy, not as theory, but as daily experience over time. Living with the posture Marcus cultivated does not feel heroic. It does not arrive with a sense of arrival or resolution. It feels quieter than that. The change shows itself not in what disappears from life, but in how life is carried. Days still contain friction. Plans are interrupted. People disappoint. The body tires. None of this stops. What changes is the inner response. The mind no longer treats each disturbance as a problem to be argued with. Attention moves more quickly toward what can be done and away from what cannot be changed. The most noticeable shift is in pace. Thoughts slow slightly. Reactions gain a fraction of space before they solidify. That space becomes familiar. It is returned to again and again. Within it, choice remains available, even when circumstances feel tight. Emotion continues to arise. Sadness still appears when something is lost. Concern still arises when something matters. Pleasure still registers when something goes well. What fades is escalation. Feelings no longer demand total agreement. They inform without overwhelming. This steadiness alters relationships quietly. Conversations lose sharp edges. Listening becomes easier because defensiveness has less work to do. Disagreement no longer feels like a threat to identity. Others' moods pass through awareness without taking residence. Work feels different as well. Effort becomes more contained. Tasks are approached for completion rather than validation. Satisfaction comes from alignment rather than outcome. When things go poorly, correction follows without collapse. When things go well, gratitude replaces inflation. Evenings become gentler. The mind reviews the day without accusation. What was done well is acknowledged. What fell short becomes instruction rather than indictment. Sleep arrives more easily when the mind is not rehearsing unfinished arguments. Over time, this way of living builds quiet trust. Trust that clarity can return, that difficulty can be met, that no single moment defines the whole. Life becomes less about securing the right conditions and more about responding well to the conditions that appear. This does not remove sorrow. Loss still hurts. Change still unsettles. The difference lies in proportion. Pain occupies its place without claiming the entire field of awareness. Joy does the same. Marcus's philosophy does not promise peace as a permanent state. It offers steadiness as a renewable one. Each return to attention restores balance briefly, and that brief restoration is enough. The posture that emerges is neither detached nor reactive. It is present, engaged, measured. One remains involved in life without being consumed by it. The world continues to move. Time continues to pass. Roles begin and end. What remains is the capacity to meet each moment with care, clarity, and restraint. That capacity, practiced quietly over time, shapes a life that stays intact even as circumstances change.